What if I told you there was a secret structure hidden in all great talks, all great speeches, from the Gettysburg Address to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech? And what if I told you that we have decoded that secret structure and you can use it for your own pitches and presentations? And anytime you have to persuade someone of something, that could be to hire you for a job or to invest in your startup or to buy your product. Anytime you have a pitch or presentation or any type of messaging that uses storytelling, you can use this structure too. So luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 193. I said last week's episode with Nina Sossaman-Pogue was episode 193, but it wasn't. It was episode 192. This is episode 193, and today you are here with me, and today we're talking about Nancy Duarte's Sparkline presentation structure. Now, you may remember, if you're a loyal fan of the Storytelling Lab, that we had Nancy on the show back in episode 112, I believe. Nancy is absolutely incredible. Nancy and her husband co-founded Duarte Inc., and Duarte Inc. helped other companies create great presentations. That was the problem that they saw, was that presentations are just so boring, PowerPoints, right? And so they started writing books and creating workshops and helping companies understand how to connect with people. So in order to do their job better, Nancy had a hunch, had a thought that there might be a narrative through line, a pattern, if you will, that existed among all great speeches. And so they studied hundreds, if not thousands, of all the great speeches over time and dissected this sparkline. She revealed this sparkline that seems to exist in all of these, and she breaks it down. And we're going to talk about it today because it's so exciting to me, because even though Duarte Inc. is focused on presentations, it's all storytelling. It doesn't matter if you're presenting your argument and what you're trying to convey or convince your audience of in a PowerPoint presentation or a LinkedIn post or an Instagram reel, TikTok video, YouTube video, a live speech, an elevator pitch, your email newsletter, any format. Presenting is presenting. Storytelling is storytelling. Persuading is persuading. You use the same tools and same devices, you just might use a different format. Now, I, like many others, first heard about Nancy Duarte from her very famous TED Talk, which now has millions of views, where she explains what the sparkline is. I mean, so many people have been influenced by this, but I still find that not enough people know about it. And what I love so much about it is it's a little bit validating for me. It's all the things that we talk about when it comes to storytelling, the rhythm of stories. I always talk about increasing tension. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, and releasing that tension in this rhythm. You've heard me talk about the rhythm of stories. This is exactly what it is. So I get excited. I nerd out about it a little bit. So here is the Sparkline by Nancy Duarte. Now, it's very much modeled after the hero's journey. In fact, Nancy knows the hero's journey. We talked about it a lot on episode 112, like the back of her hand. So you'll see some similarities, even though the hero's journey is like 17 steps and the abridged version is 12 steps. But in terms of the flow and where we take the reader, the audience, on the journey we take them on, it is very similar. So we start off with the status quo, where things are now, or as Nancy calls it, what is. So that is basically painting a picture of the current realities of your world. Depends on who you're talking to, right? So if you're talking to an audience of small business owners, then you kind of paint the reality of like the problems that they're dealing with, the struggles that they're dealing with, what their day-to-day looks like, okay? And then we reach the first turning point, which is where you present what could be. Now, if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, that's fine. I'll try to explain things visually so that you can get it. But I will say, if you can, jump over to the YouTube version, because I'm going to show you the diagram of the Sparkline, and it's a lot easier to see it visually. But the first turning point, which is what she calls the call to adventure, i.e., very much like Joseph Campbell's call to adventure, is when you create the first bit of imbalance by juxtaposing what is with what could be. What is their status quo, where they are now, which of course is full of all the problems that they struggle with, right? So then you initiate or you start with the first idea of what the world could look like if they adopted your idea, your book, your startup, whatever you're trying to sell them or persuade them of. Sell them kind of has a negative connotation. Whatever you're trying to convince them of that could help them, the value you're trying to deliver to them. This is the first time you show them, hey, what if it was better? Life or business, your story, your journey doesn't have to be this way. So you create this imbalance of what it could look like, right? So much so, and you do this and you make that space between what is and what could be as large as possible. You make that gap between the two as large as possible. So you start to show them what could be in a way that makes them think, oh, that would be great. I would love that. And you start to paint the picture of what is to make them think, oh man, I really can't live like this anymore. I need a change. So what is, and then what could be. Now, there's a couple examples. Let's pause there for a moment. There's a couple examples of common presentation types that do this incorrectly. So let's talk about them. The first type of presentation that does this incorrectly is the report, Nancy calls it. And that means when you have someone that comes up, let's say it's a 30-minute presentation and they spend 20 minutes talking about what's wrong, the current state of the industry or your business, et cetera, et cetera. And if it's 30 minutes and let's say it's a 3-act structure and, just for example purposes, each act is 10 minutes. So 10-minute intro, 10-minute body, 10-minute conclusion. They spend the first 20 minutes, act 1 and 2, establishing all the things that's wrong, all the data, giving you a report. And then just the last 10%, the last act, showing you what new thing they've created, what could be, right? And just with that, okay, here's the current state of things, but what if we had this? Would that help? And it's a report. It's boring. You run the risk of losing their attention, especially if they're busy, like C-level type folks who have a meeting coming up and they've got a million things that they need to be doing and different places they should be spending that valuable time. You've lost them by the time you got to the thing that you're trying to show them or serve them. Doesn't work. Let's talk about the flip side of that, the pitch. This is someone who comes in heavy-handed and only the first act, the first 10 minutes of their 30-minute presentation is what you're dealing with now. And then the last 20 minutes or 2 acts is spent with trying to sell you the idea that they have, i.e. it's a pitch. Now, a different thing happens to your audience. You kind of still remove them from the story because they feel like they're being sold to, or that the presentation is just about this thing that you have to sell. You ever been to a workshop that's really like a workshop or a webinar that's really a sales pitch? It's just a 60 or 45 or 30-minute sales pitch, and you know it's coming? It's the worst feeling. And if you're like me, you've probably already resigned. If you don't actually dip out of the room, you've probably already resigned to like, I'm not going to buy whatever this thing is. So now I'm just stuck here. So you're not as bored as you were with the report, but you're still equally removed. So here is the difference in the Sparkline and the pitch or the report. Nancy starts off with what is, jumps up to the possibilities, the heightened positive possibilities of what could be, and then turns it back down to what is now. And then what do you think happens next? We go back up to what could be. This is Act 2. This is the middle of her presentation. So after the call to adventure with that first hint at what could be, we go back to where it is, the status quo, and remind them, oh, yeah, this really does suck. Like I really do need a solution for this. Then we go back to what could be again and excite them. This is contrast. We're going to talk about this a little bit more because this is the crux of why this works so well. But you're basically ebbing and flowing up and down between what is and what could be. Again, trying to widen that gap as much as possible so that you're showing the difference and you're making the what is look really negative so that they don't want to live in that world anymore. And you're making the what could be really positive so they're like, oh my gosh, I would do anything. I need this right now. I have to exist in that world. That's what you're trying to do. And you simply go back and forth, up and down. Now you're getting to the part that I talked about or alluded to in the beginning, this rhythm of storytelling. I talk about increasing tension and releasing tension, opening loops and closing loops, asking questions and then answering those questions. This, my friends, my fellow storytellers, is the ebb and flow, the rhythm of storytelling. And why that is so important is because of two things: that rhythm that we talked about and also the resistance. Now, let's talk about the resistance part of it. What I love so much, I think this comes directly from Nancy, is when you introduce a new idea, there is inevitably going to be resistance. Most of the time, it's not even founded. It's just because we're so fearful of doing something different. People often, this is psychology. This is all psychology. It's not just story structure, right? For structure's sake. It's all rooted in how we think and process information. So we can't help but to reject new ideas because we want to stay comfortable. Even though the status quo isn't great, we want to stay there because it's just easy. It's just comfortable, right? So we're going to think of ways of like, that'll never work. We don't have the money for that. Like, we don't have the team for that. You know where I'm going with this. You probably have these thoughts too. I know I sure do. So you're immediately always going to be met with some resistance, even if it's just internal in their minds and they're not vocalizing it yet. They're thinking it. So think about when you're in a sailboat, if you've ever been in a sailboat, and you meet the resistance of the wind. Mighty, nature, Mother Earth, the sea, Poseidon, whatever you want to call it, is pushing this wind against you, and you're trying to go forward. Well, if you don't know, the way to do that is not by just trying to trudge through and go forward. It won't happen. So what do? You ebb and flow back and forth to cut through the resistance that way. That's how you move forward. Folks, if that is not the perfect metaphor for cutting through the resistance that you will face when you're presenting a new idea to someone or you're pitching something to someone who knows they're being pitched, that's how you do it. Ebb and flow. And then going back to the rhythm, now this is my take on things. When you immerse someone in so much into a story world that they don't even know they're being told a story or they don't even know they're being pitched because you're doing such a great job at presenting, such a great job at storytelling, it is very much like they're in a trance. There's a thing called narrative transportation where their minds transport themselves, their brains process the information in the story as if it's happening to them. They think, at least on a psychological level, that they are in the story. There is this trance that you put them into. Anything that removes them from the story is bad because now they know I'm being told a story. So if you hear, like in a movie, like bad audio or something's confusing, you're like, oh, it removes you from it. When you're going back and forth, this ebb and flow, it is very much like hypnosis, in my opinion. It lures them into that trance of in your story world where they are totally immersed. And they're listening to what you have to say. They're hanging on your every word to know what happens next. That is very much a product of that back and forth that Nancy talks about in the Sparkline of what is and what could be. When you're pitching them with the 10% of your pitch is just about what is and the rest of it's about what could be, we're removed. We're removed from the story. We know we're being sold. So we don't fall into that trance. Same thing with the flip side, with the report. When you spend 20 minutes explaining to us where things are and you're giving us a bunch of data, we're like, oh my, this is boring. I'm removed from the story. I am no longer in that trance. So that rhythm is important for the trance, but it's also important to cut through that resistance. Okay, now back to the Sparkline. We go back and forth plenty of times. There's no set number. It doesn't have to be 10 times. It just has to be more than once, like the report and the pitch. You're going back and forth, ebbing and flowing between what could be and what is currently, all the way to basically your presentation's Act 3, which is the next turning point. The first one was the call to adventure, where we first showed or hinted at what could be. And then the final turn point is what in story structure we would call the climax, or what I say, the change from within the character. This is the call to action. Instead of the call to adventure, which launched us into this presentation and what could be, now this is the call to action where you articulate and you show them the final what could be, which Nancy calls the new bliss. This is really painting the picture of what their world could look like if they adopted this new idea or this new product or whatever you have that you're trying to show them or serve them, right? So each time we go up to what could be, we're just showing them what life could be like. But this final one is where you land a plane, and you do it in a way so that they walk away crossing the threshold back to their world, hopefully into the new world, adopting that idea. If you land the plane well enough and you paint the picture of what the new bliss of their life or their business or their journey, their story could be, if you do that well enough, they will cross that threshold, leaving that presentation, leaving that story, committed to taking action, knowing that it won't be easy, but it'll be worth the reward because they can't live in the what is any longer. Now, two things before we go. I mentioned earlier that I want to come back to contrast. That is the principle that this whole Sparkline is based on, and it applies to not just your story structure, but everything. If we're talking about performing on stage or having a presentation or pitching somebody in a meeting or a Zoom call or whatever, or if you're writing a text story or just audio in a podcast, right? Contrast is always key because, again, you want them to be immersed in that story world and you don't want them to realize they're being told a story. So variety and switching things up, no matter what sensory element, no matter what device or tool or medium you're using, switching things up is absolutely crucial to keeping them in that moment. If we start hearing the same thing or seeing the same thing over and over and over again, it pulls us out of that trance. So contrast in the Sparkline example is clearly the what is contrasted with, juxtaposed with what could be. So that's like the narrative contrast, basically. Other examples between like current state and future state of narrative contrast would be the problem versus the solution, or stories versus data, switching things up. You also do it with your vocal delivery. I learned this from a speaking coach. Sometimes you want to be loud and animated and going fast, and then sometimes when you want to make a point, you slow it down. Boom. That switch up triggers my mind. Psychologically, we are wired to notice differences, to notice contrast. This is why it's so important. If I'm starting to fall asleep a little bit, my eyes are getting droopy, when I switch things up a little bit and I get really excited, then you're like, whoa, something different happened. And you can do that with so many different tools. You can do it visually if you're creating anything that we're going to look at on the screen, right? You can have visual contrast where you can have an icon that's playful and then very serious text, or any alternating elements like that. Just something that makes a difference. Any type of visual contrast works. Size and scale. You can have something really big versus something really small. Different colors that pop out. Anything that grabs their attention that shows a little bit of contrast, a little bit of juxtaposition. You can do it vocally, which we've already mentioned. You can do it with your body movements. And that same speaking coach that was working with me said sometimes you just need to stop. You pace around a lot, and sometimes you just need to stop, and that emphasizes the point, right? And I learned that. So every now and then when I wanted something to really land and I want you to take it home, I'll stop moving so nothing else but my words is what you're hearing. So think about it. How can I add contrast with this? What is a way that I can switch up the way I'm delivering my information currently, pacing, volume, etc., that keeps that audience engaged so that they aren't falling asleep, they aren't getting bored, and they continue to stay in that storytelling trance that you've put them in. Okay, so before we go, I want to give you a real example of this. Nancy did a great job of breaking down Steve Jobs and Apple's 2007 launch event for the iPhone. It was monumental. It was historic. Steve Jobs is one of the world's best storytellers. In fact, I think it was him that said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how he launched this new product using the Sparkline so that you can see it and apply it to your own Sparkline stories. Okay, so he gets there and he establishes what is. And he does that by talking about the current market and performance of several other products, retail stores, the already existing iPod, iTunes, etc., etc. So he shows things that, have been currently on the market. And then he goes to the first what could be. And I'm going to read you exactly his quote. And he says, when you hear this, you could tell like how he's already building that intrigue, even though he doesn't really go into anything quite yet. He says, "This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device." So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod and iPhone, are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone. Boom. Lands it right there. Then he goes back to what is, goes back to what could be. He creates contrast by going back to what is several times and comparing the iPhone features with current products that are on the market and amplifies that difference, right? Again, remember what I said at the very beginning, painting the picture so they're hearing what is and they're like, oh, that really doesn't sound cool. I thought it was, and then showing them what could be. Now, I could probably have a whole episode on this next part, but then Steve Jobs was a master of suspense, and he's already built it up by telling us, and alluding that these aren't 3 revolutionary products, they're 3 in 1. And so that opens that loop, right? That increases the tension, and we're craving the answer to it. So then what Nancy calls the star moment, which stands for something they'll always remember. That's something to keep in the back of your head, and that could be another podcast episode. Let me know if you want to dive deeper into it. This is when he reveals and cuts on the iPhone for the first time. It's the gasp moment. And so he was going through the features of the iPhone by clicking through photos of the device when it was turned off on the presentation screen. So it was turned off, they haven't seen it. So when he finally powers the iPhone up and demonstrates the scrolling feature for the first time that no one had seen before, right? Because we were all using keypads and Blackberries at this time. The audience gasps, an audible gasp, and then breaks into applause. Now that is the something they'll always remember moment. So think about that too in your Sparkline stories. So he continues to go back and forth through what is currently and what could be. And then finally, I'll show you the new Bliss, right? Landing the plane so that they want to cross that threshold and adopt this new idea, or in this case, the new phone. So he ends it very enthusiastically talking about this new product. And he sets the stage for the new beginning, or in Joseph Campbell's world, the new world, right? After you've gone out of your ordinary world, you go become transformed and you come back to the new world, right? Steve Jobs says, "I didn't sleep a wink last night. I was so excited about today because we've been so lucky at Apple." This goes back to it and bookends what he said at the very beginning. This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. So it's very similar. It's very good parallels and pillars for this story. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. I was so excited about today because we've been so lucky at Apple. We've had some real revolutionary products. The Mac in 1984 is an experience that those of us that were there will never forget, and I don't think the world will forget it either. The iPod in 2001 changed everything about music, and we're going to do it again." Putting the stake in the ground right there. "We're going to do it again with the iPhone in 2007. We're very, very excited about this." There's an old Wayne Gretzky quote that I love. "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." Oof. As an athlete, I know that quote very well. It gave me chills. We've always tried to do that at Apple since the very, very beginning, and we always will. Thank you very, very much. So he's painted this picture, letting you know the new bliss of what your world could look like, and that we, Apple, have always been here creating revolutionary products, and we will always continue to be here. So you feel like they are dependable. You feel like this is not the only time they're going to reinvent something, and you want to be a part of that. So you leave with this feeling of the new bliss of what could be, and because of that, you adopt that idea. You cross that threshold. This is a masterful delivery of Nancy Duarte's The Sparkline. So, before we go, I want you to think about this, how you can use this for yourself, for any of your stories. Again, your email newsletters, your LinkedIn posts, your videos, of course, your presentations, anywhere you are presenting an idea, a thought, a product, something that you're trying to show someone and persuade them of, right? Even if the product or the thing is yourself. Think about painting the picture of the status quo and then the big dream of what could be. And then you create that contrast, you create that rhythm back and forth between the two. And that's so super important for that story trance. And then you end with what that final transformation can be and the call to action for your audience to adopt it, right? To cross that threshold with you. That is how we're going to do this. You can apply it anywhere. Think about this. When you give a talk, don't just state your point. Spark something. Use this Sparkline. That is what triggers that adoption, that belief, that trust, like Apple does in the minds of your audience. That is why it's called not a story structure, but a Sparkline. Show the contrast, build the desire within them, and lead them hand in hand to that new world. Okay, storytellers, that is it for today's episode on Nancy Duarte's Sparkline. Look into this more. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if you want to dive deeper into the star moment or anything else. I'm here for your requests. You can always email me, but I hope that you appreciated and enjoyed this episode of the Storytelling Lab, and I will see you next time. My name is Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.